The mystery of the strange cauldrons is centered in a remote area of Siberia known as the Valley of Death. This region is located in the Vilyui River Basin in western Yakutia, part of the Sakha Republic in Russia's far east. The area encompasses over 100,000 square kilometers of largely uninhabited forest and swampland. This vast, isolated region is extremely difficult to access with no roads and terrain that is challenging to traverse on foot. According to legends and eyewitness accounts, the cauldrons are described as large, dome-shaped metallic objects partially buried in the ground. People have reported that the unknown metal is copper-like but extremely hard. The walls are about 2 centimeters thick and the diameter of the dome ranges from 6 meters to 9 meters. The dome is partially submerged in the ground with only the upper half being visible. Some have even shared that the insides have spiral staircases. According to experts, the cauldrons are gradually sinking further into the permafrost over time, leaving behind circular patches of unusual vegetation. The earliest known written account of the cauldrons comes from Russian explorer R.K. Mach in 1853. In his book The Vilyui Region, he wrote about a giant submerged metal cauldron with only its rim visible and trees growing out of it. Yakutian legends speak of these objects existing for centuries. The native Yakut and Evenk people called them Olguis and considered the area cursed, naming it the Valley of Death. Ancient legends describe a series of cataclysmic events and battles between gods that resulted in tremendous explosions, fireballs, and the appearance of these metal structures. Other specific encounters were documented in 1936, the 1940s, and the 1970s. Furthermore, various strange phenomena have been associated with these cauldrons. Some accounts claim the interiors of the cauldrons remain warm even in harsh winter conditions. People and animals allegedly experience sickness, weakness, and even death after prolonged exposure to the area. Symptoms described are similar to radiation poisoning. Additionally, unusual or abnormally large plant growth is reported around the cauldrons, and various devices, including compasses, are said to malfunction in the vicinity of a cauldron. Despite the intriguing reports, concrete scientific evidence for the existence of these cauldrons remains elusive. Several expeditions have attempted to locate and study the objects, but with limited success. In 2013, a team led by scientist Mikhail Visok claimed to have found metallic objects in shallow swamp water. They described walking on smooth, metallic surfaces with sharp edges. However, this claim has not been independently verified. Several scientific explanations have been proposed for the phenomena reported in the Valley of Death. One suggests that these cauldrons are natural formations or iron caps. Other theories involve volcanic activity, underground gas deposits, and old meteorite impacts. The Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner built in 1919, stands as one of the most odd maritime mysteries in history. This vessel, 255 feet long and capable of carrying 3,500 tons of coal, embarked on its final voyage from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on August 22, 1920. The journey was marked by unusual events from the start. The original captain, William H. Merritt, a World War I veteran, fell seriously ill just days into the journey. This unexpected development forced the Deering to return to port in Lewis, Delaware, where both Captain Merritt and his son, Sewell Merritt, who was serving as first mate, disembarked. The G.G. Deering Company, owners of the vessel, quickly sought replacements to keep the ship on schedule. They appointed Willis B. Wormel, a 66-year-old retired sea captain, to take command of the ship. Wormel, despite his age, was an experienced mariner with a reputation for being a capable and no-nonsense captain. To fill the position of first mate, the company hired Charles B. McClellan, a younger and less experienced sailor. On September 8, 1920, under the new command, the Carroll A. Deering set sail once again for Rio de Janeiro. The initial leg of the journey appeared to proceed without incident, and the ship successfully delivered its cargo of coal to Brazil. However, it was during the return journey that tensions began to surface and escalate among the crew. In early January 1921, the Deering made a stopover in Bridgetown, Barbados for supplies. It was here that the first clear signs of trouble emerged. Captain Wormel, concerned about the behavior of his crew, confided in Captain Hugh Norton of the Augustus W. Snow, another ship docked in Barbados. Wormel expressed his worries about the crew's unruly behavior and his particular distrust of First Mate McClellan. Wormel's concerns were not unfounded. During their stay in Barbados, McClellan's behavior became increasingly problematic. He was observed to be habitually drunk while ashore, and was reported to mistreat the crew. The situation reached a critical point when McClellan, in a state of intoxication, was arrested by local authorities. The arrest of the first mate created a significant issue for Captain Wormel. Despite his misgivings about McClellan, Wormel made the decision to bail him out of jail on January 9th, 1921. The tensions between Wormel and McClellan were not merely a matter of personal distaste toward each other. They had serious implications for the ship's operations and safety. Captain Norton and other witnesses reported overhearing McClellan complain that he couldn't discipline the crew without Captain Wormel interfering. McClellan also claimed that he had to do all the navigation due to Wormel's poor eyesight. These statements suggest a fundamental breakdown in the command structure of the ship, with the two most senior officers at odds over critical aspects of ship management. Perhaps most alarmingly, multiple witnesses, including Captain Norton, his first mate, and another captain, reported hearing McClellan make a chilling statement. "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk. I will." This threat, whether caused by the alcohol or genuine malice, made the rest of the voyage very uncomfortable. Despite these ominous developments, the Carroll A. Deering set sail from Barbados on January 9th, bound for Hampton Roads, Virginia. The last confirmed sighting of the Deering occurred on January 29th, when it passed the Cape Lookout lightship. This encounter was reported by lightship keeper Captain Thomas Jacobson. As the Deering approached the lightship, it hailed to report that the ship had lost its anchors and chains during a storm off Cape Fear. This information was relayed by a man described as tall and thin with reddish hair, speaking with what Jacobson perceived to be a Scandinavian accent. Notably, this description did not match that of Captain Willis B. Wormel or any other known crew member, raising questions about who was in command of the vessel at this point. Captain Jacobson also observed something unusual about the crew's behavior. He noted that they were quote-unquote milling around on the quarterdeck, an area where sailors were not typically allowed during normal operations. This odd positioning of the crew, combined with the unfamiliar man giving the report, suggested that something might have been wrong aboard the Deering. The message from the Deering requested that the ship's owners, the G.G. Deering Company, be notified about the loss of anchors. However, due to a malfunctioning radio, Captain Jacobson was unable to relay this information immediately. Following this sighting, the Deering was rumored to be observed one more time on January 30th. Another vessel reported seeing it sailing directly towards the dangerous Diamond Shoals. This sighting was the last time the Deering was seen under sail, with its crew presumably still aboard. The next day, January 31st, C.P. Brady, a lookout on duty at the Cape Hatteras Coast Guard Station, spotted a ship that had run aground on Diamond Shoals. The vessel was later identified as the Carroll A. Deering. Brady stated that the ship was perched on the shoals with all its sails set, which is unusual for a grounded vessel. The discovery immediately raised alarms, but the weather conditions at the time prevented any immediate action. Strong winds and high seas made it impossible for rescue crews to approach the stranded ship safely. For several days, the Deering remained just out of reach, with its fate unknown. It wasn't until February 4th that the weather calmed enough to allow a boarding party to reach the Deering. Captain James Carlson led a tugboat rescue crew to investigate the grounded vessel. What they found upon boarding created great concern and confusion. The ship was completely abandoned. There was no sign of the 11-man crew, nor any immediate evidence of what might have happened to them. Several government agencies were involved in the investigation, including the Department of Commerce, U.S. Coast Guard, Department of Justice, U.S. Navy, Treasury Department, and State Department. Herbert Hoover, then serving as the Secretary of Commerce under President Warren G. Harding, took a personal interest in the case. Hoover's involvement elevated the profile of the investigation and ensured that significant resources were devoted to solving it. Lawrence Ritchie, Hoover's assistant, was appointed to lead the investigation. He began by gathering all available information about the Deering's final voyage, including interviews with individuals who had encountered the ship or its crew in the months leading up to its disappearance. One of the first steps in the investigation was a thorough examination of the abandoned vessel. Investigators meticulously documented the condition of the ship, noting the damaged steering equipment, the missing logbook and navigation instruments, and the state of the galley with food laid out as if in preparation for a meal. The investigation also focused on the crew members themselves. Detailed background checks were conducted on all 11 men, including Captain Willis B. Wormel and First Mate Charles B. McClellan. Investigators looked into their personal histories, financial situations, and any potential motives for foul play or desertion. Family members and acquaintances were interviewed to gain insight into the crew's state of mind before the voyage. A significant portion of the investigation centered on the ship's stopover in Barbados in early January 1921. Investigators interviewed Captain Hugh Norton of the Augustus W. Snow, who had spoken with Captain Wormel during this stopover. One of the most intriguing aspects of the investigation was the analysis of the last confirmed sighting of the Deering by the Cape Lookout lightship on January 29th. The description of the man who hailed the lightship, which did not match any known crew member, raised red flags. Investigators attempted to identify this individual and understand why he, rather than Captain Wormel or McClellan, was communicating with the lightship. The investigation took an unexpected turn in April 1921 when a message in a bottle was found near Buxton, North Carolina. The note, purportedly written by the Deering's engineer, claimed the ship had been captured by pirates. This led to handwriting experts being brought in to authenticate the message. However, after thorough analysis and questioning of the man who found the bottle, Christopher Columbus Gray, it was determined to be a hoax. Gray eventually admitted to fabricating the note. As the months passed, the investigation began to lose momentum. Despite following numerous leads and exploring various theories, investigators were unable to reach a definitive conclusion about what had happened to the crew of the Deering. In late 1922, nearly 2 years after the Deering was found abandoned, the official investigation was largely concluded. Lawrence Ritchie submitted a comprehensive report to Secretary Hoover detailing the findings of the investigation. While the report explored various possibilities, including mutiny, piracy, and abandonment due to natural causes, it did not endorse any single theory as the definitive explanation for the crew's disappearance. On May 19, 1780, an event known as the Dark Day plunged much of northeastern United States into an eerie darkness during daylight hours. This phenomenon has intrigued historians and scientists for centuries. In the days leading up to this event, residents observed unusual atmospheric conditions, with the sun appearing reddish and the sky taking on a yellowish hue, foreshadowing the extraordinary occurrence to come. The darkness began to descend on the morning of May 19th, with its progression varying by location. In Rupert, Vermont, the darkness was noticeable at sunrise, while it reached Cambridge, Massachusetts by mid-morning. The obscurity peaked around noon in many areas, but in Barnstable, Massachusetts, it didn't reach its height until 5:30 p.m. The intensity of the darkness was said to be immense, forcing people to rely on candles for everyday tasks like reading or telling time. This unusual darkness persisted well into the night, with some accounts stating it didn't fully disperse until the middle of the following night. Based on eyewitness accounts, there was a strong sooty smell in the air, and rainwater collected during this period contained a light film of particles described as burnt leaves and ash. In parts of New Hampshire, ash and cinders reportedly fell to a depth of 6 inches. Rivers, particularly the Merrimack, were observed to have a black scum floating on their surface. When the moon finally became visible late that night, it appeared to have a reddish color. In the immediate aftermath and the years following the Dark Day, various theories were proposed to explain the phenomenon. Some speculated that it might have been caused by an astronomical event like an eclipse, a blazing star, or the transit of Venus. However, these explanations were quickly dismissed as they didn't align with known astronomical schedules. While not widely considered at the time, later historians would suggest that a volcanic eruption might have been responsible, though this theory lacks supporting evidence from geological records of the period. Even in the 19th century, some historians like Joseph Dow of Hampton, New Hampshire, correctly surmised that the darkness was likely caused by a combination of smoke from extensive forest fires, fog, and cloud cover. This early insight would later be confirmed by modern scientific research. However, it seems that this entry is another that may have already been solved. Contemporary scientific research has largely agreed on what caused the dark day, confirming and expanding upon the forest fire theory. Researchers from the University of Missouri's Tree Ring Laboratory conducted a study that provided compelling evidence for this explanation. By examining tree rings from the Algonquin Highlands of southern Ontario, they found evidence of fire scars dating back to 1780. When a fire doesn't kill a tree but causes damage, it leaves distinctive marks in the tree's growth rings. These fire scars allow scientists to date past fire events with considerable accuracy. The researchers proposed that massive wildfires in Canada created large smoke columns that were carried into the upper atmosphere. This smoke, combined with fog and cloud cover, created the conditions for the dark day. The prevailing westerly winds likely spread the smoke over a vast area. On the morning of May 19th, easterly winds brought dense fog from the ocean, which mixed with the smoke and clouds to form an almost impenetrable mass. This scientific explanation aligns with historical accounts of the darkness being observed from as far north as Portland, Maine, to as far south as New Jersey. The mind-body problem is an issue in philosophy and science. It addresses the fundamental question of how the mind relates to the physical body, particularly the brain. This problem has puzzled thinkers for millennia and continues to be a subject of intense debate and research. The mind-body problem has ancient roots, with early discussions found in various philosophical and religious traditions. The Buddha described the mind and body as interdependent, likening them to two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. Buddhist teachings view the mind as a constantly changing stream of thought moments, composed of 5 aggregates that arise and pass away continuously. Plato proposed a dualistic view, arguing that the soul/mind belongs to a higher realm of forms, while the body is part of the material world. He believed the soul was immortal and temporarily united with the body. Aristotle viewed the mind as a faculty of the soul, which he considered a property of the body. He saw their relationship as uncomplicated, similar to how shape is a property of an object. The key aspects of the problem revolve around a series of questions. Are the mind and body two distinct entities or aspects of a single entity? How do mental states influence physical states and vice versa? How does subjective experience arise from physical processes in the brain? How can physical brain states represent or be about things in the world? And how can non-physical mental states cause physical actions? Modern neuroscience has made significant progress in understanding the neural correlates of consciousness, which are the minimal neuronal mechanisms sufficient for any specific conscious experience. This research aims to bridge the gap between subjective experience and brain activity. However, explaining how these neural correlates give rise to subjective experience remains challenging. This difficulty is often referred to as the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. Recent trends in cognitive science emphasize the embodiment of human perception, thinking, and action. This approach focuses on how interactions between the body and its environment shape the mind, potentially offering a way to bridge the mind-body divide. Some researchers have proposed that quantum mechanical phenomena in the brain might play a role in consciousness. However, these theories remain speculative and controversial. While significant progress has been made in understanding brain function and the neural correlates of consciousness, the fundamental question of how subjective experience arises from physical processes continues to elude a universally accepted solution. On February 19, 2005, Danielle, Imbo, and Richard Petrone Jr. vanished without a trace after leaving a bar in Philadelphia. Imbo, 34, was a resident of Mount Laurel, New Jersey. She was separated from her husband at the time of her disappearance and had a 2-year-old son named Joe Jr. Imbo was described as a loving mother with close family ties. Petrone, 35, lived in Philadelphia and worked at his family's bakery. He was a single father to a teenage daughter. Petrone was known for his love of music, especially rock, and was a fan of the Chicago Bears. The two had known each other since childhood, growing up in the same neighborhood. Imbo was close friends with Petrone's sister, but they had lost touch over the years. Upon reconnecting, they hit it off immediately and began a romantic relationship, which family and friends described as on again, off again. On the evening of Saturday, February 19th, 2005, Imbo and Petrone met up for a night out. Petrone picked up Imbo in his black 2001 Dodge Dakota pickup truck. They went to Abilene's Bar and Restaurant, located at 429 South Street in Philadelphia, where they joined another couple, Petrone's friends Anthony and Michelle. The group watched a band perform, and by all accounts, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Witnesses reported that Imbo and Petrone appeared happy, sitting close to each other and kissing inside the bar. They were also overheard comparing schedules for the following weekend, suggesting plans for another date. At around 11:45 p.m., the pair prepared to leave. They declined an invitation from Anthony and Michelle to go to another bar, explaining that they each had early mornings the next day. Petrone was overheard saying he would drive Imbo home to Mount Laurel before returning to South Philadelphia. The couple was last seen walking on South Street toward Petrone's parked vehicle. Petrone had earlier mentioned to Anthony that he was happy to have found a parking spot close to the bar. The next morning, alarm bells started ringing when Imbo missed her hair appointment. Throughout the day, both Imbo's and Petrone's cell phones went straight to voicemail. Their families grew increasingly concerned. Imbo's brother, John Ottobre, used a spare key to check her home. He found nothing suspicious or out of place. However, when she wasn't home by 3 p.m., the usual time her son was dropped off by his father, John knew something was seriously wrong. When Joe, Imbo's estranged husband, arrived to drop off their son, he found Imbo's family at her home, but there was no sign of her. John initially tried to cover for her absence, but as hours passed with no word, both families panicked and reported the duo missing. Not willing to wait for the standard 48-hour period before police action, the families began their own search efforts. That night, John Ottobre and Richard Petrone Sr. drove through the city streets, checking highway routes, side streets, and back alleys between Philadelphia and Mount Laurel. They even inspected the city's waterways and bridges, including the Walt Whitman, Ben Franklin, and Betsy Ross bridges. The next day, friends and volunteers organized an extensive search covering a vast area. John Ottobre went as far as spending $1,200 to hire a Camden police officer to commandeer a helicopter for an aerial search of the city. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Danielle, Richard, or the truck was found. There were no eyewitness accounts of them after leaving the bar, no appearances on toll bridge cameras, and no unusual activity on their bank accounts, credit cards, or cell phones. The first people investigators looked into were Anthony and Michelle, the last known individuals to have seen Imbo and Petrone. After multiple questionings, detectives concluded that neither was involved in the disappearance. Attention then turned to Danielle's estranged husband, Joe. His alibi for the night of the disappearance was that he was 50 miles away at a children's birthday party attended by his stepfather, a former NYPD officer. Joe took a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. Additionally, during the investigation, some concerning details about Joe emerged. He possessed the password to Danielle's voicemail and had accessed her account multiple times in the months leading up to her disappearance. He had also made several threatening phone calls to Richard, both at his home and workplace, warning him to stop seeing Danielle. Despite these details, no solid evidence of Joe's involvement was discovered, and he has consistently denied any involvement in the disappearance. In 2008, the FBI joined the investigation. By 2014, they had developed a theory that Imbo and Petrone were likely victims of a murder-for-hire plot. FBI Special Agent Vito Rosselli, the lead investigator, stated in a 2014 press release, "Making two people and a truck disappear with no witnesses and no evidence of any kind for 9 years suggests methodical planning. It's possible a perpetrator could just get lucky, but it's more likely just what it looks like. Someone behind this knew what they were doing." This theory was based on the clean nature of the disappearance. No evidence, no witnesses, and no trace of the vehicle. However, the FBI has not named any suspects, maintaining that everybody is ruled in at this point. In 2021, the FBI released a statement reporting that an extensive investigation to date has generated some promising leads. However, neither they nor the vehicle has ever been located. In March 2022, a private search and recovery dive team called Adventures with Purpose announced that they were working on the case. The team, known for solving several cold cases involving missing persons and vehicles, conducted multiple dives in the Delaware River. While their initial searches did not yield results related to this particular case, the team has stated they plan to continue their efforts, potentially focusing on the northern parts of the Delaware River in the Philadelphia area in the future. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what might have happened. One theory suggests that the couple accidentally drove into the nearby Delaware River. However, those familiar with the Philadelphia area consider this unlikely due to the lack of easy direct access to the river from the street where they were last seen. Another theory proposes that Imbo and Petrone were carjacked and murdered, with the truck taken to a chop shop and sold for parts. This seemed plausible given the high rate of vehicle thefts in Philadelphia at the time, over 13,000 in 2004 alone. However, despite joint efforts by the FBI and the Philadelphia Stolen Car Squad, no evidence of a carjacking was found. As mentioned earlier, the theory about this being a murder-for-hire event seems to be favored by the FBI. The clean nature of the disappearance suggests a well-planned operation, possibly involving multiple perpetrators. The final theory is voluntary disappearance. While this theory has been largely discounted, it's worth noting that both Imbo and Petrone had close relationships with their children and families, making it highly unlikely that they would voluntarily disappear. Gary Martin Devore was an American screenwriter born on September 17, 1941 in Los Angeles, California. He began his writing career in the late 1960s, working on popular television shows like The Newlywed Game, The Steve Allen Show, and Tempo. Devore's skill quickly propelled him into the film industry, where he would make his mark with various action screenplays. Throughout his life, he was married 4 times, with his final marriage to Wendy Oates lasting until his mysterious disappearance in 1997. In the days before his disappearance, Devore had been working diligently on a screenplay in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was known to be struggling with writer's block at the time. The script he was working on, titled The Big Steal, was reportedly a remake of the 1949 film of the same name. However, Devore's version was set against the backdrop of the US invasion of Panama in 1989, a choice that would later fuel conspiracy theories about his fate. On June 28, 1997, Devore decided it was time to return home to Santa Barbara, California. He had completed his work on the script and was ready to reunite with his wife, Wendy, at their beachfront house in Carpinteria. The drive from Santa Fe to Santa Barbara spanned approximately 1,000 miles and typically takes around 15 hours to complete. He set out on his journey driving his red 1995 Ford Explorer. He chose to take a route that would lead him through the Mojave Desert, stretching across southeastern California and parts of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. This decision to drive through such an isolated area would later become a point of interest for both investigators and theorists. As the hours passed and night fell, Wendy began to grow concerned about her husband's whereabouts. It was unlike Gary to be out of touch for so long, especially during such a lengthy drive. Around 1:15 a.m. on June 29th, Wendy decided to call Gary's cell phone. To her relief, he answered. During this brief conversation, which would turn out to be the last time anyone spoke to Gary Devore, he told Wendy that he was pumping pure adrenaline and feeling alert despite the late hour. However, when Wendy asked about his location, Gary's response was uncharacteristically vague. He couldn't provide a specific location or even identify which state he was in at the time. This lack of clarity was severely out of character. The call ended with Gary assuring Wendy that he would be home soon. However, as the hours ticked by and morning arrived, there was still no sign of Gary or his Ford Explorer. Wendy's concern quickly turned to alarm, and she began reaching out to friends and authorities. The search for Gary Devore began on June 29, 1997. The initial hours were crucial, and Wendy's quick action in alerting authorities set in motion a far-reaching search operation that would span multiple states and involve various law enforcement agencies. The first step in the search was to establish Devore's last known location. His final phone call to Wendy became a critical piece of information. However, the vagueness of Devore's response about his whereabouts during that call presented an immediate challenge. Law enforcement agencies in New Mexico, Arizona, and California were all alerted to Devore's disappearance. The New Mexico State Police began by searching areas around Santa Fe, focusing on the routes Devore might have taken when leaving the city. They interviewed gas station attendants, motel staff, and other potential witnesses who might have seen Devore or his red Ford. In Arizona, the Department of Public Safety conducted searches along Interstate 40, a likely route Devore might have taken. They set up checkpoints and distributed flyers with Devore's photo and vehicle description to truckers and travelers. As news of Devore's disappearance spread, the entertainment industry rallied to support the search efforts. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had worked with Devore on the film Raw Deal, used his celebrity status to bring attention to the case. He appeared on television shows and gave interviews urging the public to come forward with any information. Jean-Claude Van Damme, another action star who had collaborated with Devore, also lent his voice to the search efforts, making public appeals and offering a substantial reward for information leading to Devore's whereabouts. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Devore, the search efforts intensified and expanded. Aerial searches were conducted using helicopters and small planes equipped with thermal imaging technology. These flights covered vast stretches of desert and mountainous terrain along Devore's potential route, looking for any sign of his vehicle or evidence of an accident. As the search progressed, investigators began to explore other possibilities beyond an accident or voluntary disappearance. They looked into Devore's personal and professional life, interviewing friends, family members, and colleagues. His financial records were examined for any irregularities that might suggest a motive for voluntary disappearance. His recent work, particularly the screenplay he had been working on in Santa Fe, became a point of interest. The search took an unexpected turn on June 28, 1998. Douglas Crawford, an amateur detective from San Diego, claimed to have solved the case through deductive reasoning. Crawford had become interested in the case and had been conducting his own investigation. He focused on the California Aqueduct near Palmdale, an area that had been previously searched. Crawford's search of the area yielded a significant clue, a piece of a headlight assembly that matched a Ford Explorer. This discovery prompted a renewed search of the aqueduct by authorities. Using sophisticated sonar equipment, they were able to locate a submerged vehicle that matched the description of Devore's Ford Explorer. The recovery operation was complex and took several days. When the vehicle was finally pulled from the aqueduct, it was confirmed to be Devore's, with his body inside. This discovery marked the end of the year-long search, but raised new questions about how the vehicle ended up in a location that had been previously searched and why it wasn't discovered earlier. One of the most striking and disturbing aspects of the discovery was the condition of Devore's body. When recovered from the submerged Ford Explorer, it was noted that both of his hands. This gruesome detail immediately raised red flags among investigators and the public alike. Initially, it was thought that perhaps aquatic life or decomposition may have played a role in the hands. However, the clean separation and the fact that only the hands were missing led many to question whether this was a natural occurrence or something more sinister. Adding to the mystery, some hand bones were discovered in the vicinity of the vehicle. However, forensic analysis was unable to conclusively identify these bones as belonging to Devore. Some theorists speculated that the missing hands could be a message or warning, perhaps related to Devore's profession as a writer. The phrase, "the writer with no hands," became a chilling motif in discussions about the case. Another significant suspicious circumstance was the absence of Devore's laptop computer from the vehicle. This laptop, which presumably contained the screenplay he had been working on in Santa Fe, was never recovered. Given the potential sensitive nature of the script, which allegedly contained information about the US invasion of Panama, the missing laptop became a focal point for conspiracy theories. Some speculated that the screenplay contained information that powerful entities did not want to be made public, leading to theories about government or intelligence agency involvement in Devore's death. In addition to the laptop, Devore's gun was also not found in the vehicle. Devore was known to carry a firearm, and its absence raised questions about whether he had been involved in some sort of confrontation before his death. The missing gun, combined with the other suspicious elements, contributed to theories that foul play might have been involved in Devore's demise. The location and circumstances of the vehicle's discovery also raised eyebrows. The California Aqueduct, where Devore's vehicle was found, had been searched in the days and weeks following his disappearance. How the vehicle could have been missed during these initial searches became a point of contention. Some argued that the vehicle might have been placed there at a later date, though this theory is difficult to substantiate given the logistics involved in submerging a vehicle unnoticed. Furthermore, the position of the vehicle in the aqueduct was peculiar. For Devore to have driven into the aqueduct at that location, he would have had to travel approximately 3 miles in the wrong direction on a well-traveled road. This would have involved driving against oncoming traffic, a scenario that seems implausible without attracting attention or causing an accident. Adding to the strangeness, the vehicle's headlights were found to be in the off position, making such a journey even more unlikely, especially at night. The timing of the discovery, exactly 1 year after Devore's disappearance, struck many as oddly coincidental. The fact that it was an amateur detective, Douglas Crawford, who led authorities to the location added another layer of intrigue to the case. Crawford's claim that he solved the case through deductive reasoning raised questions about how he succeeded where professional investigators had failed. Forensic analysis of Devore's body provided inconclusive results regarding the cause of death. While drowning was considered a possibility, the advanced state of decomposition made it difficult to rule out other causes. The lack of a definitive cause of death left room for speculation about whether Devore had died before entering the water. Another suspicious aspect of the case was the reported behavior of Devore in the days leading up to his disappearance. Friends and family described him as being in good spirits, excited about his new screenplay, and looking forward to returning home. This positive mindset contradicts theories of suicide or voluntary disappearance. On September 11th, 2001, as the world reeled from the in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, another tragedy unfolded in Brooklyn that has remained unsolved for over 2 decades. Henryk, a 46-year-old Polish immigrant, became the only recorded homicide victim in New York City on that same day. Henryk was born in Krakow, Poland in 1955. Despite his passion for science, he was unable to secure a place at university and instead earned a technical school degree. He found employment as an inspector for the Polish National Railroad, where he worked for many years. Henryk married a scientist named Eva, and together they had 2 children, one who was 17 at the time of his death and the other 10 years old. In 2000, Poland's economy was struggling with a 15% unemployment rate, and Henryk lost his job as a railroad inspector. Facing limited opportunities at home, he made the difficult decision to leave his family behind and seek work in the United States. He arrived in New York City in October 2000, joining his sister Lucina, who had been living in Far Rockaway, Queens for 6 years. Henryk's transition to life in America was not easy. He struggled to learn English, taking classes and watching television with his sister to improve his language skills. Despite the language barrier, he was determined to work and provide for his family back in Poland. He found various odd jobs and construction work, often taking on multiple positions to make ends meet. Henryk lived frugally, sending half of his monthly $1,000 income back to Poland for his daughter's college fund. He rented an apartment near his sister's home in Far Rockaway and commuted to wherever work was available. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Henryk began what would tragically become his final day alive. Like many New Yorkers, he started his day early, heading to his construction job in Lower Manhattan. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Henryk, along with countless others in Lower Manhattan, witnessed the immediate aftermath of this first attack. As chaos ensued and emergency responders rushed to the scene, Henryk's worksite was quickly shut down. The second plane struck the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. In the following hours, the Pentagon was hit and another aircraft crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back against the hijackers. For Henryk, the closure of his worksite presented a significant problem. As a recent immigrant sending money back to his family in Poland, he could not afford to lose a day's wages. This financial pressure would ultimately lead him to make the fateful decision to seek work elsewhere on that same day. After leaving his worksite, Henryk made his way back to Far Rockaway, where he lived near his sister. Once home, he began searching for other work opportunities. He turned to the classified ads in Nowy Dziennik, a Polish-language newspaper that served the local immigrant community. It was in these pages that he found an advertisement for a cleaning position at a Pathmark supermarket in Brooklyn. Determined to secure work for the night, Henryk made his way to an employment agency in Bay Ridge that catered to the Polish community. The agency, like the rest of the city, was in a state of distress. The owner was distraught, as her husband worked at the World World Trade Center and had not been heard from since the attacks began. Despite the unprecedented circumstances, the agency was able to arrange for Henryk to start work that very night. He was scheduled for a midnight shift at the Pathmark store in the Farragut section of Brooklyn. Before his shift, Henryk made a phone call to his wife, Ava, in Poland. It is believed that the call was likely filled with a mix of reassurance and concern. Henryk would have wanted to let his family know he was safe, given the alarming news coming out of New York. Ava, understandably worried about the situation, urged her husband not to go out that night. She was quoted saying something like, "I told him just in case, don't leave tonight because it can be dangerous in New York." However, Henryk decided to proceed with his plans. Henryk studied a subway map to determine the best route to the Pathmark. Unfortunately, the planning led to a critical error. Henryk decided to take the A train to the Utica Avenue station near the north end of Albany Avenue, where they believed the Pathmark was located. What he did realize was that the Pathmark was actually located about 3 miles south of where they thought it was. This misunderstanding would lead Henryk into one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Brooklyn, far from his intended destination. At around 11 p.m., Henryk exited the subway at the Utica Avenue station. He began walking west along Fulton Street toward Albany Avenue, several blocks away. A witness later recalled passing him during this walk. When he reached the Albany Avenue intersection, he turned right and headed north, unknowingly walking into danger. The northernmost block of Albany Avenue, where Henryk found himself, was known for its high crime rate and drug activity. At approximately 11:40 p.m., residents in the area reported hearing an argument followed by gunshots. A woman living on nearby Decatur Street who was caring for her sick mother heard the altercation but was too afraid to look out her window. Police were called and emergency services arrived minutes later. Henryk had been shot once in the lung. However, it was too late. Henryk was pronounced dead at the scene. The area was immediately cordoned off, but the usual protocols for a homicide investigation were impossible to follow due to the extraordinary demands placed on the department in the wake of attacks. Typically, the NYPD's Specialized Crime Scene Unit would have been dispatched to secure the area and collect forensic evidence. This unit is trained in advanced evidence collection techniques and is crucial in preserving the integrity of a crime scene. However, on this day, the crime scene unit was unavailable, having been deployed to assist with the ongoing emergency at Ground Zero. In lieu of the crime scene unit, an evidence collection team, normally tasked with handling nonviolent property crimes, was sent to process the scene of Henryk's murder. While these officers were trained in basic evidence collection, they lacked the specialized skills and equipment that would have been brought to bear in a normal homicide investigation. This compromise in the initial evidence gathering process would later prove to be a significant obstacle in solving the case. Despite these limitations, the evidence collection team did manage to retrieve some crucial items from the scene. They found 7 spent shell casings from a .40 caliber handgun, indicating that the shooter had fired multiple times but only hit Henryk once. This suggested either poor aim or that Henryk had been running away when he was shot. The team also noted that Henryk's wallet, containing $75 in cash, was still on his person, a detail that would later fuel speculation about the motive for the crime. The investigation was further hampered by the limited number of detectives available to canvass the neighborhood and interview potential witnesses. In a typical homicide case, up to 9 detectives might be assigned to this task. However, due to the demands elsewhere in the city, only 3 detectives were available for Henryk's case. Detective George Harvey, who would later become the lead investigator on the case, explained the challenges they faced. Back in 2001, there were no iPhones, there were no video cameras. There were a few, but not like there is today in the neighborhood. Back then, we just relied on the public to come forward and give us information. The detectives began by interviewing residents in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. They spoke with the woman who had heard the doorbell ring but had been too afraid to answer. They also interviewed other neighbors who reported hearing an argument followed by gunshots. However, no one claimed to have witnessed the actual shooting, and the darkness of the night combined with the fear induced by the gunfire meant that potential witnesses were scarce. As days turned into weeks, the investigation continued but with diminishing returns. The lack of eyewitnesses, surveillance footage, or clear physical evidence made it difficult for detectives to develop any solid leads. The community's reluctance to cooperate with police, a common issue in high crime areas, further complicated matters. In the months that followed, detectives continued to pursue various angles. They looked into local gang activity and drug-related crimes in the area, considering the possibility that Henryk had inadvertently walked into an ongoing dispute. They also explored the theory of a botched robbery, although the fact that Henryk's wallet was untouched seemed to contradict this idea. Henderson County, based in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, was a quiet, close-knit community in the 1960s. Crime rates were low and violent crimes were rare, making the events of July 1966 all the more shocking to the local population. On July 22, 1966, Henderson County was rocked by the discovery of 3 brutally murdered bodies in a grassy clearing near Lake Summit off North Lake Summit Road. The victims were Vernon Shipman, 43, Charles Glass, 36, and Louise Davis Shoemate, 62. They had been murdered 5 days earlier on July 17th. The bodies were arranged in a crude semicircle, each bearing massive head wounds likely inflicted by an automobile bumper jack. Glass and Shoemate had multiple puncture wounds, and Shoemate's body showed signs of sexual assault. Adding to the scene, objects were placed on the bodies in a seemingly ritualistic manner. A piece of scrap iron on Shipman's neck, Glass's crutches arranged in a cross shape over his body, and a whiskey bottle tilted off Shoemate's neck. All 3 of the victims were said to be well known within the local community. Vernon Shipman worked for the NC Employment Security Commission and co-founded Tempo Music Shop with Charles Glass. He was known as quiet and easygoing, with a love for cooking and entertaining. He had even recorded his own albums and opened for famous performers. Glass was also known for his interest in Asian culture and voodoo, often hosting large parties at his home, which he called Hong Kong Hill. Louise Davis Shoemate, a factory worker from Asheville, was described as a very private person with few personal effects and no telephone in her apartment. When the bodies were discovered, curious onlookers flocked to the area, inadvertently destroying potential evidence. This influx of people trampled the grass, disturbed the positioning of objects, and potentially obliterated footprints or other trace evidence that could have been crucial to the investigation. The lack of proper crime scene management protocols at the time exacerbated this issue, as the area was not immediately secured and protected from outside interference. Furthermore, the Henderson County Sheriff's Office, which led the initial investigation, was ill-equipped to handle a crime of this magnitude. Most of the deputies had little to no experience with homicide investigations, let alone one involving multiple victims and potential ritualistic elements. This lack of expertise led to crucial mistakes in the early stages of the investigation, including the mishandling of evidence and failure to follow up on potentially important leads. While no one has ever been officially charged with the murders, 6 primary suspects have emerged, each with their own connection to the case and potential motives. All of these suspects are now deceased, making the case all the more complex. Edward Thompson Jr. is considered by many investigators to be the most likely perpetrator of the triple murder. Born in 1934, Thompson had a troubled past and a history of violent behavior. In 1968, 2 years after the triple murder, Thompson went on a violent crime spree that included kidnappings, rapes, and murders across several states. He was eventually captured and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1989. Investigators noted striking similarities between the triple murder and Thompson's later crimes, including the brutality of the attacks and the sexual assault details. Additionally, Thompson was known to frequent the Hendersonville area around the time of the murders and may have known Charles Glass. However, this connection was never definitively proven. Another suspect was named Jim Burrows. Jim was a friend of Vernon Shipman and a former obituary writer for the Asheville Citizen-Times. He became a suspect due to his alleged confession and knowledge of non-public details about the crime. He reportedly confessed to the murders to his wife, though he later recanted this confession. Some of the details that Jim was aware of that were not immediately revealed to the public involved the positioning of the bodies and the objects that were placed on them. Furthermore, he was known to have a volatile personality and struggled with alcohol abuse, which may have acted as a catalyst to the incident. The third suspect was a man named Paul Saxman. Paul Saxman was a chiropractor with connections to both Shipman and Glass. He became a suspect due to a potential financial motive and his behavior following the murders. He had accused Charles Glass of pocketing rent money from a property that Vernon Shipman managed for him. Similarly to Jim, Paul also had a temper, which he frequently acted on. After the murders, he reportedly acted suspiciously, including making inquiries about the investigation that some found odd. The other two suspects included Harold Dean Hood, John Shadrick, and Frank Myers, all of whom were less likely candidates of being the murderer.